Hello my friends, my name is Artur and I am an Estonian reserve soldier. I did my time and now I get to live a civilian life, but in case war comes I grab my rifle and my uniform and go back to war. This is how it works in Estonia. US invasion of Afghanistan. I don't know much about it. I've seen many movies about it, but I don't know the backstory and I don't know the outcome much. So today we're going to dive into that because I want to know more about it. And it's a new war. It's not one of those, oh, the war in the 80s, it was different. No, it's a very modernized war. It's a very new war. There are video clips of that war in YouTube. There are many movies about it. Many of you guys know people who have died there. A lot of American vets right now have been to Afghanistan. Till nowadays it's a very prominent word in American military society. Afghanistan, back in Afghanistan. So we're gonna watch what this conflict meant for America. And I'm gonna compare it to my own military experience. It's a longer video, so sit back and relax. Get yourself an Estonian Youtuber Cup to drink tea while you watch my videos. Let's jump into it.
On the frigid slopes of Tartu in southern Afghanistan, a team of Navy SEALs are engaged in combat. As they struggle to make progress through the knee-deep snow, Taliban and Al-Qaeda insurgents open fire on them with rifles and machine guns. With most of the SEAL team already pinned down, Master Sergeant John A. Chapman takes the initiative, pushing forward up the slopes and drawing fire away from his comrades. Encountering an enemy bunker, he eliminates the occupants in a deadly close-quarters firefight.
Okay, wait, this is the... we watched the first Medal of Honor ever recorded. This is that story. So we've seen it. I love it to see it again, and this is a different animation. Very cool. I mean, the first one was a reality shot. I mean, we watched the video. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. The first Medal of Honor ever recorded. And this is it, connected to the Afghanistan war.
Even as the SEAL team leader pushes up the mountain to assist him, Chapman emerges from the bunker and engages the second enemy position, sustaining several direct hits in the process. Although he will succumb to his wounds before medical help can arrive, his heroic actions saves the lives of his squad mates, earning him a posthumous Medal of Honor.
I remember last time watching that video, it was so difficult for me to see this, and he sacrificed himself for his team, although others also died. Now the video begins with it, so it's gonna be a very heavy video to watch, I think, because a lot of Americans died in the Afghanistan war. Also, I have a question, forgive me if I don't know this, but what's the Gulf War? What is it? How is it different from Afghanistan war? If somebody knows the timeline, Gulf War versus Afghanistan war, invasion of Afghanistan, what's the difference? Just leave it in the comments.
Sacrifice of John A. Chapman was just one more name added to the list of men who died in the pursuit of justice over September 11th, a date forever seared into the American consciousness. On that infamous day, 4 planes were seized by members of Al-Qaeda. While one was diverted from its target by the heroic efforts of its passengers, the other 3 would go on to strike the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, inflicting nearly 3,000 casualties in the worst terror attack to ever occur on...
Which day was worst? Pearl Harbor or 9/11? I don't know the dead counts of those two, but just, again, you can leave it in the comments. Which one was worse?
US soil. But even as rescue teams began picking through the rubble, a cry for vengeance went out, resounding across the wounded nation. No matter who was responsible, this attack would not go unanswered. From the start, US intelligence operatives had one chief suspect in mind: Osama bin Laden, head of Al-Qaeda and former member of one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden was already a suspect in the bombings of 2 US embassies in East Africa, and the Clinton administration had made several efforts to apprehend or assassinate him in 1998 and 1999.
I remember before Osama bin Laden was executed, he was the most wanted terrorist in the world. The bounty on his head was incredibly high, I remember, and he was so very wanted. Every news article talked about him, how much he was. I was a kid back then, I still remember those headlines, Osama wanted, where is he? He strikes again, whatever, stuff like that. And suddenly, he's dead. Yeah, I should watch a video about that also, actually, that mission.
Fortunately, bin Laden was a wily opponent, seemingly capable of escaping from any trap. But with the international spotlight now firmly on Al-Qaeda's activities after the 9/11 attacks, pressure began to mount on their primary supporters in the Middle East, the Taliban. While the US was still mourning its dead, President George W. Bush issued a stirring ultimatum to the Taliban, who were the de facto rulers of Afghanistan. His message was clear and succinct: expel Al-Qaeda and turn over bin Laden, or we will smash your illegal regime to pieces and dig him out of the rubble ourselves. The Taliban.
Damn, that's a strong message from a president. I mean, Trump is giving those messages left and right, like we will do this, we will do that, but I don't think he has the strength or force behind him like Bush did. I was a kid back then, I'm not that old, you know, but still feel like Bush was like a firmer or a strong-handed leader. But I'm not saying I would vote for him, I remember him as being this big dude in the news who always speaks firmly, you know.
Taliban stubbornly refused, and so the stage was set for yet another bloody conflict in the Middle East. But before we discuss the 2001 invasion, let's take a few minutes to establish some context. Historically speaking, Afghanistan has been one of the most tumultuous and unstable regions on Earth. Isolated from its neighbors by the tall peaks of the Hindu Kush, it remained a land of nomadic cattle farmers and tribal fiefdoms well into the 20th century. Any real developments in modern infrastructure were rudely interrupted by the 1978 Communist Revolution, which led to a Soviet invasion 1 year later. As the new front line of
the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan messed the whole thing up. Before, the country was just they fought a lot, but still they could have evolved a little bit. But when the Soviets went in, it was a horrible war. They lost. The Soviets lost, by the way. They lost by a landslide. It was horrible. Tanks, planes, everything shot down. It was horrible. Men from Estonia had to go. It was forcefully drafted, so if you're a Soviet Socialist Republic like Estonia was, some of the men had to go there and just die there. It was a very bloody war. And then they pulled out, leaving behind a ruined country. It can never get its footing back. So that's what they did. They just screwed everything up. You could say that the horrible screw up leading to nowadays started with the Soviets.
Ongoing Cold War, Afghanistan received immediate attention from a plethora of state actors, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, and most importantly, Pakistan. Ever since it gained independence in 1947, Pakistan has had good reason to meddle in Afghanistan's affairs. Much as Germany in the 19th century devoted its diplomatic efforts to prevent an alliance between France and Russia, Pakistan has invested huge amounts of time and resources into preventing Afghanistan from establishing ties with India. Such a union would isolate Pakistan, leaving it vulnerable economically and militarily. During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Pakistani Inter-Service Intelligence Agency, or ISI, anonymously funneled money and equipment from the CIA and Saudi Arabia to guerrilla forces in Afghanistan.
I have a question. If US wants to meddle in these businesses, it was Cold War, they want to fight against communism, so why CIA is funding? Why not just the US government, you know? CIA is anyway under the US government. You could say the US government is funding them to fight against communism there, but it's said that CIA is doing it. Why CIA? Is it because they can get away with it? They can do things more secretively? But in the end, it's just US government, right, who gives the order to the CIA, right? So, what's the difference there? What's the difference? You could just say that the US government did it, right?
Afghanistan. The largest of these forces was the Mujahideen, a diverse group of tribal warlords and jihadists with little in common besides the shared goal of driving out their foreign occupiers. Using Afghanistan's mountainous terrain to their advantage, the Mujahideen waged a successful campaign of guerrilla warfare against the USSR. When the Soviet Union was forced to pull out of the country in 1989, it led to the total collapse of the not-so-democratic Republic of Afghanistan just 3 years later. It was during this period that the Taliban first came to prominence. Consisting of ethnic Pashtun students from traditional Islamic schools, the Taliban initially seemed a preferable alternative to the Mujahideen, who are now busy fighting amongst themselves. Taking advantage of this chaos, the Taliban stormed onto the international stage. But they captured the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, and set up the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan.
By the way, the Taliban was trained by Pakistan. As much as I know, the Talibani students, all of them were trained in Pakistan as immigrants, and then the Pakistanians sent them back to Afghanistan to create chaos, basically. So the whole conflict is fabricated. Fabricated by US, the Soviet Union and Pakistan. Not much to do with Afghanistan itself, it's just a game of politics on Afghani soil.
Aggressive totalitarian government would be officially recognized only by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and of course, Pakistan. Under the new regime, Afghanistan quickly became a safe haven for terrorists, drug traffickers, and slavery rings. By 1999, the country was exporting at least 4,000 tons of opium poppies, 75% of the world's supply. This was often the sole source of income for Afghan villages, ensuring that support for the Taliban would continue despite their brutal interpretation of Sharia law. This made the country a perfect hiding place for Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. Of course,
yeah, imagine how weird this is. This is America, right? The US, Soviet Union goes into Afghanistan, tries to establish communism there. US, wanting to prevent the spread of communism, supports the rebels against the Soviet Union. Soviet Union leaves. Taliban comes to attack the rebels. The rebels deform and start to dislike US also, because it's so much infighting because of US, who imports weapons and, basically violence there. Then the US has to fight the group that they just supported and support some other groups. And all of the groups that the US has supported in any time of the history in Middle East have turned against the US. So whatever US supports, they have to fight it in the end. So it would be better not to support anybody, because you have to fight it anyway, and it's so expensive in the end. And they can attack you back. So if you look at what US has supported and what they have fought, who they have fought with, they're the same people. It's so weird. It's like the full circle happens there. You support them, they attack you. You fight them, you support somebody else, they attack you. It's just fabricated conflicts.
2001, the United States was no stranger to combat operations in the Middle East. During the Gulf War, US forces had smashed Saddam Hussein's forces, despite the dictator possessing the fourth largest standing army in the world. Invading Afghanistan, however, presented challenges not seen since Vietnam. The US would face a decentralized guerrilla force, many of whom were veterans of the Soviet-Afghan War. While Saddam had arrogantly attempted to match the US gun for gun, the Taliban could simply retreat into their mountain strongholds and wait for the storm to pass. The key to a successful invasion was to cut off the Taliban from support in the Middle East. That meant dealing with Pakistan, whose inter-service intelligence agency had been a staunch ally of the Taliban since their inception. The US laid down a simple ultimatum. Pakistan was either against the Taliban or against America. When the leader of the ISI implored Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage to consider the complex history of the situation, Armitage simply replied, "No, the history begins today." Pakistan formally renounced its support for the Taliban on the 15th of September, just 4 days after 9/11. The next step was to establish contact with the sole opposition group to the Taliban left in Afghanistan, the Northern Alliance.
So yeah, there's an opposition group, right, the Northern Alliance, who are basically also jihadists, maybe terrorists. They want to kill everybody and make Sharia law. So you begin to support them and train them, and they will take over the whole country and turn against you. That's the whole circle. I can't see this as a win-win situation. I see this as a lose-lose situation, which always happens in the Middle East.
Out of the remote Panjshir Valley, the Northern Alliance was chiefly composed of former Mujahideen who had agreed to set aside their differences and present a united front against their enemies. On September 26th, an 8-man team of CIA agents operating under the codename Jawbreaker arrived in the Panjshir Valley. Their purpose was to secure the cooperation of the Northern Alliance, a task made considerably easier by the $3 million in cash they had brought with them.
Yeah, the task is incredibly easier if you have 3 million in cash. I think I could secure a lot of alliances with that kind of money. Yeah, it is truly incredibly easier. That's funny a bit. You're not making allies, you're buying them which works out good. If you have a lot of money like America, I'm not judging here, I'm telling that it works, yes, but it's not a long-term solution. They might turn against you if you run out of money or if you don't want to pay anymore. But as a short-term solution, very good.
Was then joined by Task Force Dagger, which began providing equipment and training to the Alliance militia. 10 days later, the US-led coalition of nations launched an aerial bombing campaign. Taliban fighters all across the country had their morning prayer routines rudely interrupted by thousands of pounds of US ordnance raining down on air bases and military.
Oh, I wouldn't want to be the enemy of America. Like they can attack you with anything. I mean, you guys are from US, most of you. Some of you are not, but like, you guys, the weaponry you have, I wouldn't want to be an enemy of that. Like you're doing your 5 a.m. prayer to Allah, Allah Akbar, and then boom, suddenly it's raining bombs. That's what Allah gives you. Don't become an enemy of US.
Infrastructure. Within 24 hours, the Taliban's air defense network was obliterated, and ground forces were clear to move in. The coalition was made up of men from several nations, including the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand.
I think also that Estonia men went there but as volunteers and they got paid for it a lot, but that's the second time Estonians went to Afghanistan, not under Soviet Union, but as free country soldiers.
But at the start, only the US and the UK were directly involved. Additionally, Special Forces units from dozens of countries were involved in the invasion. The first Special Forces squads were inserted into the Panjshir Valley via the same route taken by the Jawbreaker team. There, they met with the overall commander of the Northern Alliance, Fahim Khan, and began a long and arduous trek through the mountains.
The Northern Alliance is not, there are allies. No, they're jihadists. They were extremists, Muslims, but they were against Taliban, who was even worse. So actually, if you see here Northern Alliance is like an ally, no. They are killers and murderers and they're really bad and they're terrorists, but at this position, they were the only ones to turn to. So it's so weird how tables turn or how alliances shift during war. And also another interesting thing is a very big portion of the First World connected themselves and their militaries to go and fight in Afghanistan. Like there was Britain, France, everybody just, let's go to the Middle East and let's settle this business. It sounds funny to me a little bit. Is it how it is? Be it how it be. Right now we will carry on with the Estonian Youtuber Cup competition. My friend, go and get the cup. Look, it's beautiful, it's magical. It will give you a lot of good things. For example, an incredibly strong immune system. Go and get the cup, you will never be sick. We are back. Behind me you can see the Hall of Fame, where all of the states and countries are represented who have gotten the cup. Getting the Estonian Youtuber Cup is good for you because you get the very cool cup, but you also support the channel actually. I haven't talked about it much, but actually getting the cup, yes, it keeps the channel going. It's like Patreon, only you actually get something for it, like get something physical, and it's a cool cup. I like it, I drink tea from it every day, and I suggest you go and get it also. It's quite nice, therefore you can make sure that your entertainment that you like will keep going, keep coming out from YouTube. I promise I'll keep doing it. We have 7 new names who have represented their states. We have Damien Russell, Connecticut. We have Austin Beck, North Dakota. But hold your horses, hold. It's not just North Dakota, it's 2 cups. That means 2 points go to North Dakota. What is North Dakota? Who lives there? What? North Dakota has always gotten several points at a time because people just get so many cups. They're so proud about their North Dakotan state. If you know anyone from North Dakota, if you are, just write it to me. What makes you so proud, or what makes you represent the state so much? I'm very glad about it. I'm surprised. Joe Zimanis. Sounds like Latvian or Lithuanian. You, my friend, have a very Eastern European Baltic name. Zimanis. Joe Zimanis. Massachusetts. Andrew Martin, the guy with 2 first names. Andrew is a first name and Martin is a first name. I know both of those names in Estonia, also Andrei and Martin. Your point goes to North Carolina. We have South Carolina, but we don't have North Carolina, so let's add it. We have Ethan Ovzak, Minnesota. Ovzak. It sounds European or like Inuit. Ovzak. It's like a Hungarian or something. It's very strange. Goes to Minnesota. I don't know how come Minnesota has that many. I thought Minnesota is also one of those like smaller states, you know. We have Joshua Hansen. Joshua Hansen, why not Handsome? Mr. Handsome, Wisconsin. Marshall with 2 L's, Sigmund. Also North Carolina. I mean, we didn't have North Carolina before and now we have already 2. So hey, North Carolina people, you have woken up. You are woke, my dudes. But first, thank you to everybody who has gotten the cup. You directly have supported the channel and you have made my life easier. And you can make sure that I can keep making these videos to you. Go and get the cup, put your state on a Hall of Fame. Back to the video. What is North Dakota? It is 3rd on the Estonian Youtuber Cup competition, meaning that it has some good people getting the cup, supporting the channel, and also they're proud about their state. Somebody tell me more about North Dakota. It's like I've never heard about it even before, but now it's suddenly up on the pedestal here. You from North Dakota? Share some information down below.
To the Taliban-controlled city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Simultaneously, members of the 75th Regiment of U.S. Army Rangers airdropped onto an airstrip southwest of Kandahar. Thanks to skirmishes with the Northern Alliance closer to the city, only a single unfortunate Taliban soldier had been left as guard. With that airstrip secured as a forward operating base for later operations, the assault on Mazar...
I mean, the Taliban is fighting with RPGs, Kalashnikovs, and they have some smarter weapons, but not many. They have no idea what's coming against them. The whole military might of the First World and America, which is of course worth as the rest of the countries combined, still they have no freaking clue.
Mazar-e-Sharif began on the 9th of November. The Taliban had entrenched around the city, but their fortifications only prolonged the inevitable. After the U.S. Air Force spent a few days bombarding the defenders, 2,000 Northern Alliance fighters, led by General Abdul Rashid Dostum, stormed the city to mop up any remaining resistance. After a battle that lasted only 90 minutes, 700 Taliban fighters had been killed or captured. The Northern Alliance suffered fewer than 50 casualties.
Whoa. So I guess how it works is they let the Northern Alliance do the bloody work, they bomb, and then the Northern Alliance goes and fights, sweeps off the ground, which is alright. You let them do the war. You just do the fun part of the war, which is not dying. I cannot judge it, because I don't want to die. So yeah, I mean, it's their war, I don't want to fight it for them.
The fall of Mazar-e-Sharif came as a major shock to both the Taliban and U.S. Central Command. Both parties had assumed the city would resist for months and require a long period of brutal street fighting to liberate. But now, the road to Kabul lay wide open, and the Northern Alliance wasted no time advancing south towards the capital.
By this point, Kabul, as a capital, is supposed to have this prominent effect, right? You take Kabul, you take the capital, the enemy is on its knees. No, it's a pile of rubbish already back then. It's bombed. These buildings were down, people were starving. I'm sure it wasn't much of strategic importance because back the cities were already destroyed by the Soviet Union and they didn't build up much in those next 30 to 40 years, so there's not much to take there.
To their astonishment, the Taliban offered no resistance, and Kabul fell only 3 days later. This pattern continued for several weeks. Conventional resistance was all but pointless. U.S. air power was absolute, and moving in the open was a death sentence. The largest battle fought during this period was at the city of Kunduz, where 5,000 Taliban and Al-Qaeda soldiers were besieged by coalition forces for 12 days. During this time, the 75th Ranger Regiment conducted assaults on Taliban camps in the mountains around Kandahar. America was sending a strong message. Their forces could be anywhere, at any time, with no warning. There was nowhere to hide. However, despite all progress, things were about to take an abrupt turn for the worse. On November 25th, a prisoner revolt broke out at Kala-e-Jangi, near Mazar-e-Sharif. Over 600 Taliban and Al-Qaeda POWs seized the fortress and its armory, which included heavy weapons such as machine guns and rocket launchers. Although the revolt was eventually crushed, the body of CIA agent Johnny Michael Spann was recovered from the rubble. He was the first American killed in Afghanistan as a result of direct combat. Meanwhile, the siege of Kunduz ended with the Taliban surrendering en masse. However, many of their leaders were mysteriously absent when the city fell. It is suspected that they were airlifted out of the city by the ISI shortly before it fell. This incident, known as the Airlift of Evil, is one of the most controversial of the whole war, and symbolic of the complicated political game being played out in the background of the invasion. Speaking of politics, November's operations saw the rise of Hamid Karzai, future president of Afghanistan. Using a small guerrilla force backed up by coalition troops and air support, Karzai liberated the town of Tarankot on the 15th and defended it against a Taliban counterattack. Local militia then flocked to Karzai's banner, swelling his ranks to over 800 men. On December 6th, Kandahar, the Taliban's last major stronghold in Afghanistan, came under siege. The city had already been the target of coalition bombing campaigns and had been hit by a wide variety of ordnance, including Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Okay, tell me more about Tomahawk. Everybody talks about them Tomahawks. I watched a video about American military spending, and there was a lot of Tomahawks there. Every year they buy new and new ones. They're expensive as hell. What's the deal with them? What makes them so special? Let me know. I don't know much about these weapons. I know there's Moab, the mother of all bombs, like the huge, scary bomb, the biggest of all bombs that doesn't run on nuclear. It's just regular explosive. But Tomahawk, I have no idea what makes it special. I've heard about like the POW camps where they held Taliban fighters, and as soon as the Americans got to Afghanistan, they set up these camps because you need to hold the prisoners somewhere, and people wanted to revenge. I know Americans did some slight war crimes there to revenge 9/11, just some torture. And I don't want to focus on it. Everybody does it, but just I know it happened. I saw some some news lines and everything like that, but I don't want to focus on it on this video.
Now surrounded on all sides, the defenders decided that negotiation might actually be preferable to death after all. In the end, the biggest obstacle US forces faced was a friendly fire incident that saw a bomb dropped near Hamid Karzai's position, lightly wounding him and killing 3 American soldiers.
Oh.
Despite this, negotiations were successful, and Kandahar surrendered on the 7th. With this victory secure, Hamid Karzai became Afghanistan's new president, which marked the end of the Taliban regime, although there was no sign of Osama bin Laden or most of Al-Qaeda's leadership. US intelligence speculated that they fled to Jalalabad, and the coalition mounted a swift pursuit. But then, the terrorist forces withdrew to one location everyone had hoped to avoid, the infamous White Mountain cave network known as Tora Bora. Not wishing to repeat Soviet mistakes, coalition leaders decided to rely on local Afghan troops for the assault. Using money provided by the CIA, they recruited 3,000 militia and sent an Army Special Forces team, Operation Detachment Alpha 572, to advise and support them.
So yeah, if you go up the mountains with your big gear, your tanks, your choppers, they will be shot down. Up the mountains, you're gonna fight man against man, you're gonna show your force. Then even a man with a Kalashnikov can do more damage than your high smart weaponry. So smart move actually using money to hire others to do that very dirty job. Because up the mountains you can't do much. So you gotta be a mountain person to fight in the mountains, and US soldiers are not. So yeah, the best way was to hire locals or send in special forces.
Things seemed to be going well. The militia were able to take the mountain slopes, and airstrikes were called on every insurgent, suspected insurgent, or suspicious patch of grass in the area. Fighting in the caves proved harder, and the Afghan militia was not as well suited to the task as their CIA handlers had assumed. In fact, the militia leader was persuaded to open negotiations with the terrorists. During the brief ceasefire that ensued, most of Al-Qaeda's leaders, likely including bin Laden, escaped into Pakistan. Although deeply frustrated by their failure to capture the primary objective of the invasion, coalition leaders tried to remain positive. Afghanistan was now nominally free from Taliban rule, and the democratic process seemed to have resumed. Aid workers and relief supplies were pouring in, and it had cost the West fewer than 100 casualties. Unfortunately...
Okay, yeah, it doesn't cost you much, doesn't cost you much money even compared to what it could have cost, but still, the population is scarred. War scars people. You can't just build a beautiful democracy on top of a broken society. People need at least 4 to 5 generations to come out of that stuff. Like, I know it from Estonia. We were part of Soviets. We are scarred still. You cannot. It doesn't work like that. That's what Americans doesn't know. Unfortunately, you cannot bring democracy to broken society, to broken nations. And Afghanistan is a broken nation, very scarred, very ruled of violence. You need it to evolve slowly. People to get used to democratic systems. They need to trust it, but they don't. They trust the Kalashnikov more than the democratic system. So it doesn't really work like that.
For America, the highly controversial occupation had just begun. In February of 2002, a U.S. intelligence analyst identified what was presumed to be a force of around 300 Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters moving into the Shah-e-Khat Valley. In response, the U.S. airlifted 2,000 Special Forces soldiers into the area, where they were joined by 1,000 Afghan militia. Operation Anaconda began on March 2nd and would quickly become
2,000 Special Forces? 2,000, it's a lot of Special Forces soldiers. I mean, you could take an entire country with this, placing them on strategic points. I mean, how much... I feel like US is flexing here, or it's taking it very seriously.
Known as an unmitigated disaster. From the moment they touched down, the American forces found themselves in a Taliban kill zone. The insurgents were heavily armed, and the Apache gunships that were supposed to provide air support found themselves under concentrated fire from rocket launchers and anti-materiel rifles. 2 Chinook helicopters were shot down, and mortars bombarded US positions.
Mortars! They have freaking long-range weapons. Mortars! What? This is a planned attack. This is a trap. Oh. Ugh.
Afghan militia, meanwhile, blundered around the valley in brightly colored trucks with headlights blazing, making perfect targets for Taliban mortars. Although numerical superiority, training, and air support eventually turned the tide in America's favor, Operation Anaconda demonstrated key weaknesses in both their tactics and coordination with local forces. Even after the valley was cleared, a mere 23 Taliban bodies were found. The exact number present in the valley has never been verified, but it is thought that there were at least 600 or more initially suspected and most likely escaped over the border when the tide of battle turned. 8 US soldiers were killed and dozens more wounded. The Pyrrhic victory of Operation Anaconda set the tone for US operations in Afghanistan for the next decade. The start of the Iraq War in 2003 also diverted resources from the region, leaving the new UN-sanctioned government all but powerless beyond the capital city of Kabul. Most importantly, Osama bin Laden remained at large, his whereabouts unknown and his debt to the American people still outstanding. The manhunt for the notorious leader of al-Qaeda would continue long after news from Afghanistan stopped making headlines.
They free the country of Taliban, right? And then, what happens then? You don't have central power there. You cannot install a puppet government. It doesn't work. You need, like, as soon as you leave, as soon as the guns leave, the people will take the power, and the violence comes again. Because people know to run things with violence. That's all they know for the last 30 years. That's all they know for the last few generations. How can you build a peaceful democratic system on top of that? The soil is wrong. You cannot build it. It doesn't grow. It doesn't work. Because people doesn't work that way there. People there believe about the honor of the family, revenge, and honor killings. Like, it doesn't really connect to democracy at all. So I don't think you can, in the Middle East, I don't think democracy can work unless it takes like 10 generations to evolve like it has been in Europe and America. I recently received a nice letter from Kate. Thank you, Kate. It's a very cool letter you sent me. You sent me chocolates and coffee and everything. Thank you so much. I already drank the coffee and ate the chocolates. I usually drink tea, but sometimes I very rarely drink coffee also. But yeah, Kate, it's very sweet of you to send me this letter and the package. If you want to send me mail, the address is here. I will feature your post in the video. Also, my friends, I want to thank the Patreons for contributing to this channel. They are the people who actually, during these tough times, keep this channel going. They make sure that I can make these videos even if YouTube revenue goes down. So I'm thankful for them, and I hope you are thankful for them also. I will read you 3 new patrons. Captain Weeb. Yeah, okay, we have weird names here. Like my channel patrons, they're not normal names. They're super strange and super weird and sometimes funny, and they have numbers, and somebody just made something up on the keyboard. They fell on the keyboard and that's the name. Captain Weep, thank you for becoming a patron. We have Ender Hunter 007. You're an agent, I see. MI6, right? Double agent 007. Thank you, Ender Hunter, for becoming a patron. I feel so weird thanking like these. It's of course it's like a funny childish name, but what can you do? Thanks to it, I can make these videos, so thank you very much. We have Mr. Robert Drake. Finally, a normal name. Miss Drake, very nice. Thank you for becoming a patron. If you want to support this channel and make sure I can make these videos even in the future, then become a patron. The link's in the description below. Or you can just go and get the YouTuber Cup and just put your state on the Hall of Fame or your country. And as always, my friends, until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.